Welcome to Script Format, all you need to know to properly format your screenplay. I'm Dave Trottier, also known as Dr. Format, and in this presentation, I'll cover all the fundamentals, simple and easy. But before we get started, I have a question. Would you like a piece of cake? Now, I know I'm not there to give you a piece of cake, but if I were, and if you wanted a piece of cake, what would you think if my friends and I handed it to you like this? Not very appetizing. So what's the point? Presentation is important. And formatting your screenplay is like dressing it up for a job interview. Now, why is correct spec format important? I think we've already made this first point with the cake. But also it's the language that's used by professionals. If you want to communicate to professionals, you want to speak in their language. And it helps you write a better script, a better screenplay. And that's what we're going to talk about. But first, who is your audience? Who is your primary audience when you write a screenplay? I like to ask this in a physical classroom because when I get hands, most people will say the answer is E, all of the above. Some will say producer or the agent. The answer is actually F, none of the above. Your primary audience is the reader, the story analyst. When you send your screenplay to a producer or to an agent, they don't read it. They hand it off to a reader, and the reader writes a coverage and either recommends your script or doesn't recommend your script. If the reader does not recommend your script, then the producer or agent does not read it. So that reader is pretty important in the process. And yes, you're writing for all those other people as well, but primarily for the reader. And what does the reader want? Readability. They want the story just to flow through into their minds with ease. They want a good read. So what is readability? 5 qualities. And the first one is clarity. You want the script to be as clear as possible to the reader. And that's because readers read quickly. You cannot afford to lose or confuse a reader. You want the script to be attractive. You want it to look good. And Final Draft is going to be a big help in making that happen. It needs to be formatted properly with some white space, short paragraphs, short speeches. You want to use specific language. For example, tell me what you think is better. He is walking to the boat, or he staggers to the yacht. Well, the second one is more specific and it's clear. It's more visual, it's more engaging. The script should be economical, write lean, except unless you're writing in a very dramatic situation or you're trying to milk the emotion, but generally speaking, we want to write lean. And of course, be entertaining. Rather than an informative style, use an entertaining style. You want the reader to visualize what you are trying to communicate and to feel something in his or her heart. Okay, the difference between a shooting script and a spec script. This is shooting script format, and of course, you are probably writing a spec script. Unless you're being paid in advance to write, you're writing a spec script. This is shooting script format. It's what we normally see when we buy scripts or look at scripts online or scripts that are handed to us. Jose's POV, Maria strides towards him. How would that appear in a spec script? Jose watches Maria stride towards him. That has to be a POV shot. So you direct the camera without using camera directions when you're writing a spec script. Let's look at another example. And I pulled this right off of a screenplay. I did not make this up. Extreme close-up angle on Jose. He bats his eyes at Maria. Another angle, he winks. Dissolve to close-up, Maria winking back. We probably don't need the dissolve. We usually don't use a lot of transitions in spec writing, but of course we can. But this is how this would appear in a spec script. Jose bats his eyes at Maria and winks. She winks back. It's as simple as that. It's more readable. It's more engaging. The reader gets through it more quickly, and that's good for you. Okay, there are three parts of a screenplay. We have the scene heading, we have the action, and we have the dialogue. And this example, by the way, is from the screenplay Rocky, Academy Award nominated. But the reason I use it is I can adapt it to all kinds of things, as you will see later in the presentation. And by the way, this is kind of an outline of the presentation. We're going to first discuss scene headings, and then action, and then dialogue, and then just a little section on application, okay? Scene headings. Now, most people use the term slug lines. That's a journalistic term that we've borrowed, and it's perfectly fine to use that term. But scene heading is the actual name of what it's called. When you go to Final Draft and look at the elements, you'll see scene heading as one of the elements. I don't care which term you use as long as you understand the concept. That is what is important. Okay, we have two scene headings here, and this is that Rocky scene again. It's been extended. A scene heading consists of three parts. The camera position, interior, exterior. That, if the camera is outside the trolley, looking into the trolley, it would be exterior trolley night, because this is a camera position. This is the specific location. And then this is the time. It's going to be either day or night. Almost always. I mean, there are rare exceptions, but usually day or night. Now, down here, we have exterior, street, continuous. Why do we have the term continuous rather than day or night? Well, in this scene, we see that the trolley is empty except for a wise old woman who studies Rocky's face, and he becomes self-conscious, and they exchange some dialogue, and then he stands up, and then he steps off. So what this means, continuous, means this scene follows the previous scene continuously without any jump in time. Now, another possible extension here could be same. Same means this scene happens at the same time that this previous scene happens, but that couldn't possibly be here because we can't have Rocky stand up and step off the trolley at the very same moment. So you wouldn't use same for that. It would be continuous. Okay, I see this kind of thing in scene headings all the time. This is an extreme example, a blustery, windy night with a pale moon shining through the trees in the woods. Put the description in the description section. In this case, what is the actual location? Well, it's the woods. So exterior, woods, night, and then we have the description or the action. How about this one? Christmas morning for a location. Where am I? Are we in the bedroom, with visions of sugar plums dancing in our heads, or are we by the Christmas tree in the living room, or looking through a window into the house? We don't know. We need a specific location here, not an event. Okay, there are three kinds of scene headings, and the first two are master scene headings, which is what we have been discussing thus far, and secondary scene headings. And as you can see, this is a secondary location that is part of the master or primary location. So the living room is part of the interior of the Smith house, the hallway is part of the interior of the Smith house, and the bedroom is part of the interior of the Smith house. And so this is perfectly okay in a spec script. We usually don't see it in a shooting script, but often in a spec. There's another way to handle this. You could put the secondary location right here. When we do have two locations in a scene heading, the first one is the master or primary, and the second one is the secondary. And then we have John slams the front door and races down the hallway and into his bedroom, where he dives on top of his bed and sobs. Later is a valid secondary scene heading. You know, it just amplifies what time we're at, and it's later. We presume the same, and the same day. It's also day. And then we have his action there. So that's perfectly legitimate. Okay, another way to handle this is just to use regular master scene headings. Interior Smith House day, John slams the front door and races down the hallway. Interior bedroom, he staggers through. Now notice I didn't put continuous. I could have put continuous, but since it's already so obvious that it's continuous, it's okay to drop it off. But I mean, you would be absolutely clear if you just put continuous there. You can go either way with that. Now in the next scene, I need to set you up for this next scene. This is from William Goldman, Misery. And we're going to come in at this scene at the moment that Annie chops off Paul's foot. And I know she doesn't in the movie, but in the screenplay, she actually chops off his foot. So let's see how William Goldman handled this scene. Paul shrieks at the terrible thudding sound, and then his body jackknives. He is beyond agony as blood splashes over his neck, his face, and Annie, her face splashed with blood too, and the sheet turning red, and Annie, eyes dull, getting into position again. I mean, it's almost poetic what he has done here. And he has used secondary scene headings as a way to kind of slow the reader down and emphasize the emotion. It's just a brilliant piece of writing. It begs the question, can you use a character name for a secondary scene heading? The answer, of course, is yes. If William Goldman did it, I think I can or you can. But what it means is that the camera is on Paul until the next scene heading. So we don't describe other things in the room until we get to the room. So you have that limitation on it. Okay, I get asked this question all the time, believe it or not. How many lines of space before a scene heading? So there's 3 correct answers. Method number 1 is 1 line of space. It's the traditional method that was used in years past. And all examples that I'm going to show you in this presentation use this method mainly because it helps me get everything onto one page. So I did it for just spacing reasons. The second method is 2 lines of space before all scene headings. And this is the default of Final Draft. It creates more white space, and it gives you a sense that, okay, we're done with one bit of action, with one scene, and now we're moving into another scene. So, I mean, it's very useful that way. And then method number 3 is 2 lines of space before master scene headings, as in number 2, and 1 line of space before secondary scene headings, assuming that you are using secondary scene headings. Now, to make that happen, if you want to do that, you just use the action element in Final Draft, and when it becomes a shooting script, then it will be adjusted. In shooting scripts, we seldom see secondary scene headings. In fact, there are a few producers out there that prefer only master scene headings in a screenplay. But any one of these 3 methods is perfectly okay. You decide which is best for you and for your script. Now, how many spaces after a period? We get asked that a lot too. Here's 1 space, here's 2 spaces after a period. I learned to type on a typewriter, and we were taught 2 after a period, but we have proportional fonts now, and it's always 1. It doesn't matter which you use. No one cares. You can't go wrong on this issue. Now we have a slash here. Slash means both places at the same time, or in this case, both camera positions at the same time. And translated, That means the director can choose to put the camera inside the car interior or outside the car exterior at his or her whim. And that makes it easy for you. You don't have to jump back and forth between interior car, exterior car, interior car, exterior car. You can just write that and let the director decide how this scene's going to play. Okay, I said there were 3 different kinds of scene headings. Let's talk about special scene headings. This is the 3rd kind. Remember, master scene headings, secondary scene headings, and special scene headings for special situations. And you recognize these: flashbacks, visions, intercuts, inserts, series of shots. So we're going to look at some examples of those and how to format. First, back to that Rocky scene. This is one of the reasons I like using this, because we have 3 specific actions here. Rocky, he exits the trolley. This is the trolley scene. He waves at some hookers. They wave back. He passes a wino and helps him into a protective passageway. He plays with a sad, huge dog at the Animal Town pet shop. And so the point of this scene, of course, is to show that Rocky is a good guy because he's all by himself. No one's watching him. He doesn't have to put on a facade or anything. And it's a nice trick when you're writing a script. Now, how would you put this into montage format? Okay, with a montage and with most special scene headings, we have the special heading, and then we have the concept. In this case, Rocky walks the streets. Sometimes it's just the location. And here's the 3 actions. He exits the trolley, he passes the wino, he peers through the window. If this were a series of shots, notice how similar. The concept is Rocky walks the street. Here's the special heading, and you number them, A, B, and C. What's the difference? A montage is mainly focused around a concept like falling in love or training or passage of time, something like that. A series of shots is more narrative. It's more of a story with these things. This happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. So you decide which you should use. I see the montage used more often than the series of shots, and I see a lot of writers using these almost interchangeably. So it's a matter, you decide what you think is going to be best for your script in terms of which ones you want to use. Okay, let's look at a dream. Once again, same situation. And here you see we have the special situation, special scene interrupts. It's just one scene long, and it interrupts another scene. And in that situation, you usually want to use this format. This is the format I prefer, and it's very simple, and it's easy to follow for a reader. So we're in the trolley, and Rocky closes his eyes, and then he dreams about winning the title. He looks down and sees the old woman looking up at him in the dream, and wakes up to see her staring down at him in real life. So just a little fun with the scene. But notice how this is formatted. Let's look at a flashback. Same exact thing. Here's the scene. We have a single scene that interrupts the main scene that we're in. Here's the special heading. Here's the concept. Only in this case, it's just simply the location. Young Rocky shows his mother his black eye and fat lip, and he says, "I'm a fighter," and he gazes back at his image in the window. So we come back to scene, or that could be back to the gym. Either way you want to write that. Okay, you just want to be clear. Okay, here is an alternate way to handle it. If you're using only master scene headings, we have exterior street night, and then we have a master scene heading, interior child's room day, and then another extension, flashback. When we come back to scene, it's actually a new master scene heading. If you have a master scene heading for the flashback, you have to have one when you return, or if you go to another place, and you add present day. There are a lot of ways to do this that are perfectly correct. You want to make sure you're consistent and that you're clear in what you use. Okay, what if you have a flashback that consists of more than one scene? You just create a flashback sequence. Notice how simple this is. Begin flashback sequence, and we have the 3 scenes, end flashback sequence. So it's as simple as that. Okay, an insert. The trolley is empty except for Rocky and a wise old woman. She studies his face. She writes a note and she hands him the note. Insert the note. And you could put comma and then in lowercase letters, which reads colon. Don't need to, but you can. And then look at yourself. You're an accident. You put quotation marks around the content of the note. You always use quotation marks in narrative description to indicate that you want the audience to see and read what is quoted. And that's the reason for the quotation marks. Now, if you prefer, you could just bring this flush to the left margin. It's okay to do that. You know, traditionally, this has appeared like indented like dialogue, but you can go back here flush to the left margin and then come back to scene or back to trolley. However, these days, the insert is used much less, and mostly for long notes and letters. So what I would expect to see today is something like this. He looks self-conscious. She hands him the note. The note reads, "Look at yourself, you're an accident." And of course, we have the quotation marks here to indicate that you want the audience to see and read it. It's as simple as that. You can just write it out like that. You do the same thing with news headlines. Okay, an intercut. You set up the 2 locations, usually, not always, but normally you set up the 2 locations. And of course, this is continuous because Rocky punches in the numbers, Apollo Creed grabs his ringing phone, and then intercut phone conversation. And there's that slash again. Remember, a slash means both at the same time. So this means the director can choose to be at the trolley or at or Apollo's bedroom as he pleases or as she pleases. Okay? So you don't have to indicate voiceover to show that Rocky is speaking through the phone and we just hear his voice coming through the phone and all that. It just makes it very simple. And you just write out the dialogue. Okay, time for a little break. This is Robert Redford's Sundance Resort. This is Stewart Falls. I live on the other side of this mountain, the inexpensive side of the mountain. Now take a breath of fresh air, breathe that in, clear your head, and let's move on to action. Narrative description. And we want the audience, the reader, to see, visualize what we're writing, and of course, to feel something in his or her heart, emotion. Okay, common problems and easy fixes. And one common question I get is, how about caps? When do you cap something in narrative description? Because most scripts that we read are shooting scripts. So it's hard to know for a spec script. Okay, here's what absolutely must appear in all caps. Character first appearances and technical directions. And that would include camera directions. These would be very rare in a spec script because we seldom use those. But for example, if you had an old face morph into a young face of the same person, the word morph would be in caps because it's a technical direction. Now, you can cap sounds if you'd like. It used to be that we had to cap sounds. You go back to the 4th edition of my book and it says, yeah, you've got to cap sounds. But now it's optional. Some writers prefer just capping important sounds and that way they pop out more. you can go any way you want to go here. It's hard to go wrong on the sounds. Cap the sound, not the thing that causes the sound. You cap the sound. And you can also, if you want, signs, news headlines, the content of supers, for example. Here's a super, which means superimpose these words on the screen. 10 years later, it could be written in lowercase letters as well. Okay, here is a paragraph of narrative description, and there's a couple of things wrong with it. The first thing is it's too long. Limit your paragraphs to 4 lines or less. This is an arbitrary rule that I made up because when I've noticed with readers, they simply don't read long paragraphs. If you want to invite a reader to read a long paragraph, 4 lines or less. I've heard people say 3 lines or less. So you want short paragraphs. That's one thing. The second thing is there's too many incidental details. And I've had students look at this paragraph and say, but Dave, you say always use details, specific details in your narrative description. These are all specific details, the worn out push broom, the leftover hot dogs, you know, the gym clothes and so forth. Isn't this okay? And the answer is no, because they're incidental. They're not really that important. You need to give us a sense of what's there. Now, this is how the situation was actually handled in the Rocky script. The gym looks like a garbage can turned inside out. Now, I can see that. I can visualize it. I got the idea. The ring is small enough to ensure constant battle. See, it's readable. It's more engaging. It's more interesting to read. It's more attractive. This is really good writing. Okay, here's another example of incidental details. Jake steps out of the building, walks across the parking lot, arrives at his car, pulls out his car keys, opens the door, sits down and starts his car. We don't need all that. You might have that in a novel, but not in a screenplay. Just important details. So this is how this should be written. Jake steps into his car and starts it. The reader gets it and is on to the next paragraph. But if you wanted to make this dramatic, Jake slips out of the building, looks both ways, jittery, fumbles his car keys, scoops them up and races breakneck to his car. And now we're engaged. See, this is more entertaining. And we want to know what is going to happen next. I had to put this up. These bad examples that I'm showing are from clients who graciously gave me permission to show these. I got written permission for all of these, but I see this too much, so I have to show you this. John knew what he had to do. Well, the audience can't possibly know what's in John's head. That cannot appear on the movie screen. But he recalled the words of his aging mother, which made him hesitate. How do we know what his aging mother said? None of this can appear on the movie screen. You have to kind of write out the dialogue. Sarah gives him one of her looks. What is that? That is so vague. Is it sad, happy? Unless the context tells us, we need something specific language, make it readable. Now, this one was a lot of fun. There were 4 pages of dialogue, and then this. A raging gun battle ensues. Martinelli is eventually killed. This is what should be 4 pages. So yes, we write lean, but we dramatize dramatic situations, and we milk the emotion. And so the writer had this backwards. The dialogue scene should probably be a page, and this thing should be about 3 or 4 pages. His wingtip shoes crunch on gravel, loose bullets scatter to the ground, the bourbon bottle drops and shatters. Nothing but praise. I pulled this out of Shawshank Redemption. Notice the specific verbs. Crunch, scatter, shatters. That's what a reader wants to see. Milton is opening the door and is entering the room. These are passive verbs that we use all the time. There is nothing wrong with a passive verb. This is perfectly correct the way it is written. but it could be better if we used active verbs. Milton kicks the door until it breaks open and collapses through the doorway. Now we've characterized the moment and we've characterized Milton to some degree. See the difference there? Milton eases the door open and tiptoes into the room. He finds the antique box, eases it open, and snatches the gold bracelet. Now, if you need to emphasize a word or phrase in dialogue or a word and phrase in narrative description, you underline it. I would only expect to see a couple of these in narrative, in the entire screenplay and narrative description, and maybe, 3 or 4 in dialogue and entire screenplay. I mean, that's really rough. There could be more, but you do this sparingly, and then when the reader sees it, it pops out and the reader reads it. If everything is underlined, then the reader doesn't read any of it. Okay, let's talk about dialogue. Dialogue consists of 3 parts. This is the character name or character cue. This is the parenthetical or actor's direction or just direction. Or sometimes it's called a Riley. And the reason it's called a Riley is readers notice that in beginning scripts that characters often spoke Riley or in a Riley way. And so they started calling them Riley. So when you hear the term Riley, that should be a Riley. And, they're talking about a parenthetical. And then, of course, the speech itself. In this particular speech, Jane says, "I love you," sarcastically. This is the main purpose of the parenthetical, to indicate the subtext or the real meaning or how the person says, the voice tone, and so forth. But you only do it if it is not otherwise apparent by the context of the scene. Okay? So in this case, if we would not guess that she says, "I love you," sarcastically, that's when you put in sarcastically. Don't go overboard like this writer. Jane furiously hits the wall. Angrily, "I'm mad." I think we get it. First of all, your dialogue should not look like a want ad, like a classified ad. 3 of these exclamation points should be gone. You don't need angrily, don't need the parenthetical at all. All you really need is the nonverbal. But if you want to keep the dialogue, get rid of the parenthetical, "I'm mad," just 1 exclamation point. Okay, yeah, we should talk about these. These are important. Okay, these are extensions that come adjacent to the character name or character cue. And Final Draft allows you to do this really easily. OC is off camera. This is seldom used these days. It's used occasionally. It means the same thing as off screen, OS. And that is what we normally see in scripts today. Now, off screen means the character is right there in the scene. We just don't see him or her. He or she is not in the camera view, but it is right there. So if Jane is talking and she's right there in the scene, but we don't see her, then it's off screen here. Voiceover is usually for a voice that's coming through a device like a telephone or a walkie-talkie or a radio or something like that. But the voice originates from somewhere outside the scene. That's just kind of a general way to remember that. Continued is when a character speaks, then we have some action, and then the character continues to speak. Continued should be added, and of course, Final Draft does that for you automatically. Punctuation. This is a dash, this is a dash, this is an ellipsis. And you'll notice that a dash is made with a space, hyphen, hyphen, space. And you wouldn't have the space before because it's at the beginning of the margin, but hyphen, hyphen, space. And then with an ellipsis, you have a space after the ellipsis. This is really weird punctuation rules. You do not use these in any other form of writing. This is just for screenwriting. But, and it's not a huge deal, if you don't do this correctly. A lot of writers do not put the dash here on an interruption. They just have the one dash and then they omit this one. This is my personal bent, but most writers would not have this particular dash here. And that brings us to how we use these. The dash means interruption. So John is interrupting. And the ellipsis means a pause or continuation. So if the reader would read this, what I want, don't tell me what you want. That's how a reader would read it. Of course, when they actually shoot it, who knows what the director and the actors will actually do. But what you're trying to indicate is she's stumbling through her thoughts here, trying to think something through. You don't use these just to use them, but you have some kind of dramatic purpose for using them. Okay, use parentheticals judiciously. This one's correct and this one's correct technically. You shouldn't end a parenthetical or end a dialogue block with a parenthetical as we have here. I mean, sometimes it's done and you might be able to get away with it, but this is just overkill in terms of the Rileys. Here's how we revise it. Jack shows Jill his empty bucket, water. Jill snatches the bucket, Ratia. She swings the bucket around as they gallop to the well. Once again, it's more readable, it's more accessible, it's more interesting. A reader likes it. Okay, text messages and similar things. Okay, I'm going to show you 4 different examples. And the first one's the one I prefer if it's just 1 or 2 text messages. You just write it in narrative description. Sharon displays her iPhone to Cynthia. The text message reads, "I'm engaged." And of course, we have the quotation marks indicating that we want the audience to see and read this. If you want this to pop out, give it a separate paragraph. The text message reads, "I'm engaged." Okay, here's the third method. Sharon displays her iPhone to Cynthia. On the iPhone display, the message reads, now what this means translated is basically, you can blow this up as big as the movie screen if you want. I want this to be big. That's kind of what you're saying with that. The same thing if you had on the TV monitor or on the computer monitor. That really kind of says, just blow it up as big as the screen. And here's your fourth example. This is when characters are having a long conversation. You write it as dialogue, but you use italics. And the reason you use italics means this is not spoken dialogue. And that's why you use the italics, that's another thing that's changed. Years ago, italics were verboten, but now you're okay in certain instances. Don't forget text over here adjacent to Sharon. Just like off screen or voiceover, you just write text. You can include the emoticons or emojis. Emoticon is the old word we used to use. These are emojis. Okay, you can use those if you want. Just cut and paste. Final Draft makes that easy. Okay, now we've actually finished here, but I want to just show you 3 or 4 more little ideas on application. The thing that brings me great joy is when a screenwriter is able to take basic, fundamental formatting principles and then apply them to special situations. So for example, what if you want to include a mirage? Well, you don't find mirage in the Screenwriter's Bible or in any other book on how to do that. But wait a minute, that's a special situation, right? So it would require a special scene heading. So just create a special scene heading. So we're out in the desert. Janie is trudging through the sand and she squints at something ahead. We always separate reality from the fantasy here. And then here is the special heading, and here is the concept or location. She sees a pool of water. She jumps in. It's deep. She starts drowning. Water enters her mouth. Back to the desert or back to scene. Water enters her mouth from the canteen of a rescuer. Okay, this is an implied match cut. You could write match cut here. That'd be perfectly okay, but it's pretty obvious that this is a match cut. You could leave it just like this. What if you have 4 quick flashbacks in a row? How would you format those? That's not in any book. Well, just put it in montage format and call it a flashback montage. Flashback montage, Jerry recalls Selma, and then he has all these memories. Okay, and then we come back to the living room where he's thinking about them. Okay? Okay, here's the basic format for languages. Robert in French, subtitle. That's the Riley we use for subtitles when someone's speaking in a foreign language. I love you, my little cabbage, mon petit chou. That's a French saying that basically means darling, term of endearment. So anyway, we have that rule. Now, when I was a kid, I had a dog named Fleacheck, and I wondered what the dog was saying as he barked. And how would you do that? You know, if you wanted to show what the dog really meant when he barked, just use this rule, extrapolate from there, and just put Fleacheck barks, subtitled. Could you scratch my back? Now, there's another way to do that. Fleacheck barks. A chyron appears above his head. Scratch my back. A chyron is one of those dialogue bubbles you see in comic books, or sometimes you see in movies, you know, when people are texting, sometimes we see a chyron appear. Or in Jumanji, remember each character had strengths, weaknesses, strengths, weaknesses. It was a lot of fun. Those are chyrons, so you can use those. And because it's a technical term, it would appear in all caps. Okay, what about television? Use the same format for every kind of TV script, teleplay, as you accept multi-camera sitcoms. That has a special format that we do not have time to discuss here. But everything else uses the same format we have been discussing. You might need to add acts or something like that. Each TV show has a little different bent on how they format things, but you're in good shape if you just use standard spec script format. Okay? Thank you very much for your attention. I want to thank Final Draft for making this possible. This has just been great. It's been a pleasure working with Final Draft. And I hope that you found this to be useful for your writing. I want to wish you the very best with your screenplay, and good luck and keep writing.
Hey there, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Phil. I host the Final Draft podcast, Right On. I'm here with Dr. Format himself, Dave, and we're going to answer a few of your audience questions. We won't have enough time to get to everybody's, but considering how many people showed up, I imagine we'll be doing this again soon. So apologies in advance if we don't get to your questions. So Dave, first up, and this came up quite a bit, how do you format an exchange of people texting? Text messaging. I think we're seeing that more and more in movies and TV now. How would you format that in a script?
Okay, I would say, I think you're going to post this webinar again, because we covered that at the end of the webinar on how to handle text messages, but you could simply put quotation marks around the text message right there in narrative description if there's just one. If there's a long conversation, you write it out like dialogue, only you put the words in italics and you write text adjacent to the character name.
And I imagine the same could be done for, if you wanted to write about social media posts or things like that. Someone posted a status update on Twitter or Facebook.
Emails, instant messenger. There's so many applications to that.
Great. Another one that came up, and you might have touched on this, but if you could just expand. Say two characters are arguing or interrupting each other. How do you use dual dialogue to show that?
Okay, you can either write the word overlapping as a parenthetical when one character is talking over another. On occasion, I have seen where you can almost have columns on your script, and you have both people talking. One dialogue block is next to the other dialogue block.
Mm-hmm.
But overlapping or simultaneously as parentheticals or Rileys is also a tool you can use.
Now, what about two people on the phone in two separate locations?
Yeah.
Is it necessary between each line of dialogue to note where the different locations, or do you just mention in the initial scene heading that the characters are on the phone? What's the best way to write that?
Normally, you set up the two locations. You have one person at one place who is calling another person at another place. Sometimes it's apparent in the context of the scene. The main thing is you want to be clear that these are two different locations. You want to do that in some way. I've seen some people use the intercut, intercut and use character names, Dave/Sally, and then describe a narrative description where they are at.
Mm-hmm.
The main thing here is to be clear, and then if you do it that way one time, be consistent. Do it that way throughout your screenplay.
Got it. Now, along those same lines, what about when a scene has characters moving from one location to another in a continuous fashion? What's the best way to format that?
Just a new scene heading with the word continuous at the end. Instead of day or night, you would put continuous.
Got it. Can you talk a little bit about pre-lap dialogue from one scene to another?
Yeah, you could. And pre-lap, for those of you who do not know what that is when we hear a character's voice and then we cut to the scene where that character is at. And so he's really speaking in the next scene. And there's two ways to handle that. In the scene, in the speech that precedes the scene where the character is speaking, on the extension onto the adjacent to the character name, you would write voiceover or pre-lap.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to overlap. It's a pre-lap, it comes before. You can do the same thing with a sound. The sound of an explosion, and then we cut to exterior building day and we see the explosion. So we hear the sound before, so just pre-lap with a dash explosion.
Got it. Now, what about when you're writing a montage? What are or a flashback? And maybe this is two separate questions, but what do you think are the best ways to format montages?
Well, with a montage, normally a montage is interrupting a previous scene, and we come back to that scene. And so we just write montage, and then whatever the concept is. So montage dash falling in love, or whatever it is, and then we come back to scene or back to wherever we're at. Mm-hmm. You would always open a montage like that, even if you're going to a different scene at the end. You just have a new master scene heading. And the same would be true for a flashback.
Got it. Can you talk a little bit about what a super is and how that can be used on the page?
Yes, and these are great questions, by the way. A super, that is short for superimpose. And so when you write super 20 years later, that means superimpose on the screen this phrase, 20 years later, and of course you'd put quotation marks around 20 years later, indicating that we want that to be seen by the reader and seen by the audience. So super is the only way you're going to be able to get the information actually onto the screen. I've seen people put exterior park day 2010. But the only person who will know it's 2010 is the reader. The way to notify an audience of that is to write super. Super : and then quotation marks 20 years later.
Got it. Now, what if I'm writing a script and characters speak different languages, and so, you know, some of it's going to end up being subtitle on the screen? How would you format that?
Okay, if there's just a few of those where a character occasionally speaks, let's say in Spanish, okay, so the character's name, Geraldo, and then in parentheses, in Spanish, semicolon, subtitled, and then you write it out in English, and then it'll be spoken in Spanish, and we'll see the English subtitles on the screen. If it's going to be an entire scene that's in Spanish, I would consider using a note, you know, exterior park day, and note, the following conversation takes place in Spanish with English subtitles, and then you just write the whole thing out in English, and it just makes it easy.
Got it. Now, a lot of people ask something along the lines of, you know, I'm writing my script and, you know, I may end up directing it. How much direction is too much on the page? What's your take on that?
And we're talking about camera directions, I assume.
Yes.
Yes. And I would recommend that you describe the camera describe the action without using camera directions. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is you want it to be readable, and camera directions tend to muddy it up and make it a little bit more difficult to read. But the second reason is it's probably not going to be shot that way. Once the director gets it, you know, we got to send the production manager out to go find the location. The director's got to block the scene. They've got to decide on how many setups they're going to have. And then the actors are going to have suggestions on how to change this for their character that they're going through. And then we might have to add dialogue or take away dialogue because of the scene simply will not contain as much as you have written. So what you want to do is describe this visually as best you can without using camera directions, and imply those camera directions, but make it very readable so that the reader gets the vision of what's taking place. So instead of close up, a tear forms on her cheek, you just write a tear forms on her cheek. That has to be a close up. Mm-hmm. It can't be anything else. The camera is on her face. So you go about it that way. Now there are exceptions. And so you decide as the writer what those exceptions are. The problem I often see is the opening scene has tons of camera directions, and then the writer almost forgets about camera directions for the rest of the screenplay, but the reader is going to get a bad first impression from that first page.
Got it. Along those same lines, you know, what about the usage of inserts? What do you think is the best practices as far as that goes?
Right now, for an insert, I would just write, you know, the headline reads, quotation marks, milk drinkers turn to powder. And by the way, that was an actual headline that I saw once in a newspaper. You just put quotation marks around what the headline is. You make it pop out by giving it its own paragraph. You can still use the insert. It's just not used as much anymore, mainly for, you know, letters and that sort of thing. But so it's just really simple. Just use quotation marks, put quotation marks around the thing that you want us to see and hear. That goes for signs and the time on the clock, the score on the scoreboard, those kinds of things. Let us know what you want the audience to actually see and read.
Got it. Now, you know, we're talking a lot about script formatting. How rigid should writers adhere to the format versus, you know, injecting a bit of their own style? What do you think the right balance is?
Inject your own style in how you write the narrative description and dialogue. That's where you inject it. Now, in terms of, this is a great question because formatting does not have to be perfect. On the other hand, you want the reader and the director and the actors to be able to understand what you're trying to say, and you do that by how you use formatting. It's almost like we need punctuation marks to know how to read a sentence. And so you give it your best shot, but it does not have to be perfect. And in terms of your own style, there are so many different ways to format certain things that you can pick one of those if you'd like. Now, I need to say one other thing. Everyone out there has their own little nuance of what is correct format. So it's hard to find two people that agree on exactly everything. I mean, I remember one producer who insisted that there shouldn't be a period after interior or exterior. You know, I thought, well, who cares, you know? But so do the best you can, but don't go out and buy a handgun because you're fretting over if the formatting's perfect.
I think that's good advice. Now, you've been at this a long time. How often do rules about formatting change?
They don't change very much. I can tell you what the trend is. The trend is to be simple, clear, fewer and fewer technical directions and that sort of thing. I mean, 20 years ago or even 30 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, there were so many little things you had to do. You had to cap all sounds. You had, you know, character first appearances, and you had to have certain camera directions. I mean, and it has evolved into a simpler and simpler way of presenting your material. And that's partially because in spec writing, we're only talking about spec writing, not shooting scripts, you know, because that's where you get all the, you add all that stuff. But in spec writing, it has to, readers have to be moved by what you have written. And readers read fast because they have tons of scripts on their desk or on their computer to read, and they're the gatekeepers. You know, they write the coverage, and you live or die by their coverage.
Okay, one last question as we wrap up, and again, apologies for the folks whose questions I couldn't get to. What are the biggest mistakes you see writers making in their scripts as far as formatting goes? Is there one or two that you can point out that are pretty consistent?
Too many parentheticals, the use of dashes and ellipses just to use them, and sometimes using 2 dots or 4 dots or 5 dots and so forth. And readers just laugh their heads off when they see this kind of thing. I would say the biggest problem is in scene headings, and just understanding that there is a camera position and then a specific location and then day or night. And it's as simple as that. But for some reason, I've seen crazy things for scene headings. Like the example I gave in my presentation was interior Christmas Day. You know, where am I? You know, so you want to be careful with how you use scene headings. The reader needs to know, where am I? As soon as they see that scene heading. And then, of course, you follow that with some narrative description.
That's great advice. Well, Dave, thank you so much for your time. As we wrap up, are there any parting words you want to leave our audience with?
I just want to thank you all for attending. If you would like more information, go to keepwriting.com. If you want to contact me, Dave@keepwriting.com. And good luck and keep writing.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.